Like I said, thank you everyone for joining us today for World Turtle Day and for joining us for a webinar today when we're joined with the Marine Conservation Society, Peter and Amdeep. And just a little bit of background, at Recora, we're a corporate sponsor of the Marine Conservation Society, have been for a long time now, giving financial donations to them, but also regularly carrying out beach cleans along the River Thames, but also down in Brighton, and recording the waste and litter that's found to then aid research in kind of the litter and the waste that's ending up in our water systems around the world. So that's just kind of a little background on how we're involved with the Marine Conservation Society, but we're very fortunate today to be joined by Peter and Andy, who are going to talk to us just around the work they're doing around turtles in the Caribbean and balancing the supporting the turtle life, but also supporting the local populations and culture in those areas. So enough from me. I'm now going to hand over to Peter, and they're going to take us through a short presentation now. And if anyone has any questions, please write them whenever you want in the chat function. And if we don't answer them during the presentation, we'll have a bit of time at the end where we can go through that. So I'm now going to hand over to Peter.
Thank you, Rory, and good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for giving us your time and coming along to watch the presentation. I'm Peter Richardson. I'm head of ocean recovery at the Marine Conservation Society, and I'm joined by Amdeep Sangera, who is our UK Overseas Territories Conservation Officer, and he's in my team. And today we're going to talk to you a bit about the work we do. So just let me share my screen. Okay, can somebody just tell me whether or not they can see that?
Yeah, we can see it.
Yeah. Okay, right. So just move that. So yeah, so we work, the Marine Conservation Society mostly focuses on work in the UK, but we also have some overseas work that Amdeep heads, where we are working with the UK Overseas Territories in the Caribbean to help them help them better manage their marine resources. And some of our projects involve turtles. So that's what we're going to talk about today. Okay. So the Marine Conservation Society is a UK charity. We've been around for more than 30 years. I've been at the Marine Conservation Society for about 20 of those years. We are fighting for a cleaner, better protected, healthier ocean, one that we can all enjoy. And we have three main areas of work. One is the one that Rory mentioned at the beginning, which is fighting pollution. So that's not only plastic pollution, but also the diffuse pollution that for example, water companies are pumping into our seas on a daily basis, and that's our Clean Seas team. In fact, we're taking the government to court at the moment over their pollution plans because we don't think they're strong enough. We also have a fisheries and aquaculture team, which is working towards more sustainable fishing practice. We're not against fishing, we're for sustainable fishing. We think it's a good low carbon source of protein, but it just needs to be done properly. And then we have my team, which is the ocean recovery team, and we're all about marine protected areas, recovering our ocean ecosystems and our amazing marine wildlife. And while we have a lot of, like I said, our focus is on the UK, we do have a series of a program which includes a series of projects in the UK Overseas Territories. So we first started working in the Caribbean Overseas Territories back in 2002 on a government-funded bit of work called Turtles in the Caribbean Overseas Territories, where we assessed the status and use of turtles in the 5 territories and Bermuda. And following on from that work and the recommendations that we made, the Turks and Caicos Islands government invited us back to set up a Turks and Caicos Islands turtle project. And the whole point of that was to improve turtle management and the management of their traditional turtle fishery, as well as other turtle conservation measures in the Turks and Caicos Islands. And that's where we first recruited Amdeep, a social scientist from Smethwick, who we recruited, and and sent to the Turks and Caicos Islands, where he lived there for several years, mostly in South Caicos, the fishing capital, where he worked alongside fishermen to run this project. And he'll talk a little bit more about it, or the sort of work that we do later on. But essentially, we were doing sea turtle research, Mark, and so flipper tagging to work out where turtles are, how fast they're growing, get a rough idea of how many there are. He also worked with the local fisheries department to assess the status of the turtle fishery. So he was sampling all the turtles that the fishermen were bringing in and building up a picture of what that fishery actually entailed. And then we also did some sort of cutting edge sea turtle research using satellite telemetry, where we tagged the big sub-adult turtles and some adults to find out which habitats they were going to and where they went once they migrated away from the Turks and Caicos Islands. And then marrying all that science, we also worked with Duke University and the University of Exeter to develop to further develop a thing called the community voice method, which Amdeep will talk about later, which essentially uses film and workshops to dive into communities and get them involved in conservation. So the current sort of UK Overseas Territories Conservation Programme is all about combining science and community values for effective conservation, and that's what we do. So we are currently working in 4 of the Caribbean overseas territories, and you can see them there, mostly in the North Caribbean, Turks and Caicos Islands, British Virgin Islands, Anguilla and Montserrat. And in the Turks and Caicos Islands, British Virgin Islands and Montserrat, we're running turtle projects with the local partners. And in Anguilla, we're running a shark project with local partners. I'm sure you all know about turtles, but just a sort of a quick update. As you probably know, sea turtles are very long-lived species. They reach maturity about 20 to 30 years, and they probably live for about 80 to 100 years. They have a very complex life cycle, so they don't just stay in one place. Their life cycle occurs over vast ocean landscapes, which involve huge migrations. So adult turtles will live in one home territory, a feeding ground, but every couple of years they will go to their natal breeding grounds, the breeding grounds where they themselves hatched as turtles, to breed. And that involves migrations of hundreds, if not thousands of kilometers from the feeding grounds to the natal breeding grounds. But even before they become adult, their life cycle takes them all across the ocean. In the Atlantic, we have 6 species. There are 7 species of sea turtle in total, but in the Atlantic, we have 6 of them. And in the Caribbean, the most common turtles are the green turtle, the hawksbill turtle, the leatherback turtle, the loghead turtle, and then very occasionally you see the other Ridley turtles, but they're very scarce in the Caribbean. They're more kind of Gulf of Mexico or northern South America, but they're there. The most common turtle that we see by far is the green turtle. This is one here doing what green turtles like to do best, and that is munching on seagrass. And if you ever are lucky enough to go to a place where there are turtles and you dive on a seagrass bed, you can see that there are turtles there because the ends of all the seagrass blades are snipped square by those sea turtle jaws, the green turtle jaws. So if you're snorkeling over a seagrass bed and you see all the seagrass blades have been snipped, then there's probably turtles about, and you should keep your eyes peeled. So turtles like seagrass habitats, and in these territories there are vast seagrass meadows. There's also wetlands and mangroves that also have seagrass and algae in them, and perfect green turtle habitat. So there's a lot of green turtle habitat in these overseas territories. There's also a lot of reef habitat. So this is Grand Turk. The sort of pale water that you can see in front is a mix of seagrass and coral, and then the dark water to the left of the picture is a drop off down to deep water, and on that drop off there's a lot of fringe and patch reefs, and that is perfect habitat for hawksbill turtles. So there's great habitat for green turtles in the seagrass meadows and great habitat for the hawksbill turtles in the reef habitat. And generally speaking, that's where those turtles live, although you will find green turtles on reefs and you will find hawksbills on seagrass meadows. The other species that you get is a leatherback turtle. Now this turtle is a monster. It's a giant. It can grow up to 1.5 meters long. It can weigh up to about 900 kilos. It is the turtle that does the longest migrations, the deepest dives. And we do actually get leatherback turtles here in the UK. They visit our seas every summer to feed on our jellyfish, and they can tolerate our chilly waters because they are able to maintain their own body temperature. They're the only reptile that can do that. In the Caribbean, like this one, they don't live on the inshore waters. They're very much open ocean animals, and they only come inshore to nest, like this female is doing here. So there are nesting populations of leatherback turtles. And then you also get the species called the loggerhead turtle. This is so cool because of its massive head, and that head is full of a big beak and lots of muscles, and it uses that to crush up conch and crabs and lobsters, and sort of its favorite food is all the hard-shelled stuff. And while there are some nesting populations of loggerheads, they're generally passing through. There's a big nesting population in Southeast USA, and they tend to overwinter down south and northern South America. So the Caribbean tends to be a kind of a migration route from south to north, north to south, in between the breeding seasons. Just to give a little bit of science, if you like, so just to look at the sort of regional populations of hawksbill turtles, of the turtles in the Caribbean. Hawksbill turtles globally are considered critically endangered, and in the Caribbean, the sort of nesting populations are quite variable. So the top line of graphs are nesting counts from different beaches in Mexico, and you can see that they tend to go up and down, but the trend seems to be sort of upwards. Whereas the lower graph is nesting counts from the US Virgin Islands over the last 30 years, and they peaked in the early 2000s, and now they seem to be in decline. But these numbers are quite small. The numbers of nests, we're talking about hundreds of nests, not thousands or hundreds of thousands, but just hundreds of hawksbill nests. So they're quite scarce turtles, and that's one of the reasons why they're considered critically endangered. Leatherback turtles are considered endangered, and their fortunes are also sort of variable, but generally they seem to be declining. So the lower graph is one of the biggest populations in the Caribbean. That's in French Guiana. It used to number about between 6,000 and 9,000 nests. In recent years, it's gone down to less than 1,000. So that population seems to be in trouble. In contrast, in the north, this leatherback population in Florida seems to be going up. But again, very small numbers. We're only talking about hundreds of nests, not thousands. So the leatherback in the Caribbean, we're worried about that. Something's going on, and we're not quite sure what. In contrast, the green turtle is doing particularly well. So I don't know if you can see, but the numbers of these nest counts are in their tens, if not hundreds of thousands. So in Florida, we've got an incredible increase in the population of green turtles over the last 30 years. Tens of thousands of nests. Similarly, in Mexico, the population has gone up. It's going through a bit of a dip now, but also tens of thousands of nests. And the biggest nesting population, Costa Rica, where we're talking about over 100,000 nests, that peaked again in the sort of 2010-11 sort of time, and then it seems to be slowly declining. But still, we're talking, tens of thousands of turtles, and each of those nesting beaches are producing millions of hatchlings every year, and those hatchlings go out into the open ocean, and eventually, after about 5 years or so, they come out of the open ocean and settle in inshore waters, and that's when that's where we see them. Now, there are all sorts of threats that turtles face, but the big threats that I've sort of listed here are the ones that we really got to worry about. And the first one is habitat degradation and destruction. This is a little dinner plate sized green turtle that's come into a reef in BVI, British Virgin Islands, and this reef is pretty much devastated. There's not much for that turtle to eat there. And this is a problem. Both seagrass beds and reefs are being damaged by development, by tourism, by pollution running off the land and into the sea, and also they're impacted by climate change. So the habitats that these turtles depend on are suffering, and of course the turtles will suffer as a consequence. When these turtles grow up and mature, 20 to 30 years old, like I said, the females will come back to their nesting beaches, but they need quiet, dark nesting beaches. That's where female turtles feel most comfortable nesting. If there's any disturbance, then they will go away. And if they can't find anywhere to nest, they'll dump their eggs at sea. And of course, real estate in the Caribbean is at a premium. And a lot of those traditional dark, quiet nesting beaches are now covered in all sorts of developments, from tourism to industry to residential properties. And so there's, again, a real threat to the nesting habitats in the Caribbean, and it's a big problem that needs to be that needs to be sorted. But the number one threat, I suppose, is climate change. Climate change is the thing that I think we have to be most worried about for all the reasons, and turtle conservations as well. So even if a turtle finds a nice dark, quiet place to nest, like on this beach in Anguilla, the temperature of the nest determines the sex at which the sex of the resulting hatchlings, and very warm nests will produce all females. So what is being predicted through climate change is that with rising temperatures, we're going to get more warm nests, more nests producing more females, and males are going to become very scarce. We're going to see a feminization of the population. So there's that problem, as well as the impacts that climate change has on seagrass and on coral reefs. And the way to mitigate this is habitat protection. We need to be protecting a matrix of nesting beaches with some like this one that are fairly sparse, some that have a lot of vegetation. So there's a range of incubation temperatures available to the turtles at their sort of natal nesting areas, but also their foraging habitats need to be properly protected and managed so that there's resilience in the coral reefs and the seagrass beds for what is to come through climate change, and that's really, really important. But in what a lot of people tend to focus on in the Caribbean is the impacts of fishing. Oh, sorry, now I got an automatic slide change. I'll try and manage that. So there are extensive fishing communities in each of these territories. Mostly they are these little day boats where the fishermen go out for the day, and they'll either use nets, traps, or hand dive for lobster or conch. They're mostly artisanal. I mean, they are commercial fisheries, but they're small scale businesses. And there are small scale turtle fisheries too, but we're talking sort of tens of turtles per year, sometimes hundreds of turtles per year. And these are very traditional turtle fisheries that have been going on for many, many, many years. And while they don't have economic benefit, they do have cultural benefit. I'm just going to do something, sorry. I've done that. Okay. Hopefully that will fix my problem. Apologies. Right, so they're small scale fisheries, culturally important, not particularly economically important, but then they're sort of in decline as well. I mean, young people in the Caribbean often don't want to eat turtle. It's mostly the sort of my generation and older that still are interested in it. But the fisheries are not really, we don't think they're a major threat. There was a time when people would catch hawksbills, leatherbacks, green turtles, maybe sometimes loggerheads. Those days are over. Most of those people don't catch most of those turtles anymore. The number one turtle that people catch is the green turtle, which is what this one is. Hello.
Can you reshare your presentation so people can see the map, please?
Oh, sorry. Bear with me a second. I didn't realize I'd stopped. Yeah. Okay. Right, can you see that now?
That's great, thanks.
Yeah. So the number one turtle that people are targeting in these territories is the green turtle. As you saw from the previous slides, the regional populations of green turtles are actually doing very well. There's tens, if not hundreds of thousands of turtles nesting on the big nesting beaches. And those turtles, the turtles that those nesting beaches are producing are the ones that are coming to settle in these UK overseas territories, inshore waters, on their reefs and on their seagrass beds. And also, because there is such a kind of reverence for turtles as endangered species, often these fisheries are a source of conflict between the kind of sort of Western or American values of conservation and protection and Caribbean values associated with culture and food security. And so there's often a sort of clash of cultures, and fishermen are often vilified because they catch and eat turtles, even though the impact of those fisheries is much, much less than for example, climate change fueled by tourism and travel and all that sort of stuff, and the impact of tourism on the habitats, which is also a much greater threat. So there's often a lot of conflict around the turtle fisheries in these territories, even though they're not really the major threats. There are some other countries in the Caribbean that allow turtle fishing. So this map is a few years old now, but it shows you all the territories, the country's territorial waters, where they're shaded out in green. Those are all the countries that have completely prohibited turtle fishing. So the prevailing ethos in the Caribbean is complete protection. But there are some countries that still allow traditional fisheries, such as the UK Overseas Territories, which I think are are the ones in pink. Well, they're amongst the countries in pink, and some that have protection but exemptions for traditional use, such as Nicaragua. And Nicaragua is highlighted here because it's one of the biggest commercial turtle fisheries in the world. Between 8,000 and 11,000 green turtles are caught by Nicaragua every year. So it absolutely dwarfs what we're talking about in the UK Overseas Territories, where we're talking tens or sometimes hundreds of turtles per year. And again, these are all green turtles, not the other species. So I'm just going to hand over to Amdeep here, who's going to talk pretty about what we're doing in our current work. But before that, I wanted to just introduce him with a clip of a bit of film of what we like to do when we're off doing our work. And I shall so most of our work is social science, but we do work with partners who are doing the research, and we help them with the research. And in the Turks and Caicos Islands, we work with turtle fishermen who taught us how to catch turtles. So I'm just going to hopefully show a little clip of Amdeep in action. Can you see that? Amdeep, can you see that?
Yes.
Yeah.
Okay.
Peter, this is a green turtle, isn't it, that we caught recently in the British Virgin Islands on seagrass beds on an island called Anegada. Very flat limestone base, quite exceptional island, but also, you know, really vulnerable to the threats that Peter talked about, such as climate change. All right.
Right.
Peter,
so I'm handing over to you now.
Thank you very much. So I'm just going to get my presentation up. Right,
perhaps you could explain a bit more about what you were doing with that turtle.
Yeah, sure. So just for a start, can people see this?
Yeah.
Okay, 1 second. So yeah, that experience, we were actually part of a turtle project in the Virgin Islands, and as Peter mentioned, our projects are multidisciplinary and they've got a scientific aspect. So that was all above board and legal, and we were actually catching green turtles or any turtles for flipper tagging, actually, and that helps us to understand a bit more about the wild populations, how they're structured, how they're made up, how long these turtles may stay in a particular area, and their growth rates as well. But yeah, okay, well, and firstly, thank you again to Rory for setting this up, and everyone at Recora for giving their time. So Peter's kind of given a bit of background on the turtle fisheries across the Caribbean, and you can kind of get a sense of their natures. They're very different in size, very different in scale, and the Caribbean territories, size of their turtle fisheries are dwarfed by nations such as Nicaragua. So as Peter mentioned, we've got turtle projects in the Turks and Caicos Islands, Montserrat, and the British Virgin Islands. And our aim with these projects essentially is to work hand in hand with those user groups and communities in developing durable conservation measures that acknowledge the fact of, you know, traditions of turtle use in these areas that go back generations, but also have a conservation focus as well, you know, primarily trying to get community support for protection of those turtles that you see in front of you, the larger size classes of breeding turtles, which we've through the science we know are the most important turtles within your populations, being responsible for population maintenance and reproduction. Okay. So yeah, as I mentioned, our projects are multidisciplinary because, you know, it's not issues regarding turtles aren't just biological. They involve humans. So there's social science aspects, there's cultural aspects that need to be taken into account, and there's economic aspects. So these projects are multidisciplinary, and that person in front of you that's tagging a turtle is Dr. Shannon Gore from the Association of Reef Keepers, one of our lead partners in the British Virgin Islands with our turtle project. And that person helping her tag the turtle on the right is Thomas, a fisherman whose sister is a fisheries officer. So you can kind of see how, you know, these collaborations take place and how vital they are for securing futures for these turtles. So in terms of our interdisciplinary projects, where we come in and where we provide expertise is through social sciences, through stakeholder engagement. And what we found has had a tremendous amount of success in our projects in the Caribbean OTs is the community voice method, which is essentially a documentary film method that reaches deep into communities to understand their relationships, their values, their perceptions, ambitions regarding a particular issue. In this case, it's turtles, and factoring those into the final solutions, marrying it with the biological evidence to create solutions that aren't only good for turtles, but are acceptable for the communities that live alongside them. So how does this method actually work? Well, the first aspect is that you've got a filming aspect. And so generally we look to interview about 30 people with our community voice methods projects. And we're looking for people across a broad cross-section of society. So in front of you, you've got a gentleman called Gumption, who is a strong turtle conservationist and advocate for turtle protection in the Virgin Islands. But at the same time, we interview turtle fishers, we interview restaurateurs that serve turtle, consumers. We're looking at kind of wider societal figures such as politicians, ministers, community members, media figures, because we understand that while turtles are an issue, they're not the biggest issue in the island. So it's important to kind of contextualize them in the other issues that are happening there. And so once we've got this interview data, we go back to the UK, we essentially type out everything that is said by the interviewees and analyze it. And essentially what you start to get is you start to get these different themes arising in the data. And a trick of the skill of the video editor is to impartially show the narrative. So, you know, people are discussing protection for turtles, that needs to be factored in. If people think turtles should be fished, that also needs to be factored in. So it's trying to give a fair representation of the data that we've collected, you know, essentially of what has been said in the videos. And so once we actually create the film, we then go back to the communities to actually have these workshops across the islands where we show the films. And in fact, we've actually, this is a clip. What I'll do is I'll show a clip of a film that we're looking to share very soon. So, in fact, this is the clip of the community voice method that we did in Montserrat. It was Endangered Species Day a few days ago on Friday, and as part of that, we released this film. You can see it on the Marine Conservation Society website, but it has a very short clip, just going to give you a sense of the method.
No sound, Andy. You need to share the sound.
I have shared that sound. I have clicked on the sound function. Yeah. I'm not sure how to do that because the sound is on. So so yeah, I would recommend that people go onto the MCS website and you can actually see this new community voice method film that we've released from our Montserrat project to kind of get a sense of the method. I'll go back to my presentation.
I put the link in the chat, Andy.
Excellent. Thank you, Peter. So I said, once we've got this film, we have these workshops where the film is shown. What also precedes the film is a scientific presentation. So, for example, in the British Virgin Islands, we had Shannon Gore giving an overview of the scientific research regarding nesting turtles, in-water turtles, that kind of inform the film. And after the film, we have these really quite amazing debates where we get people to kind of give their feedback on certain aspects of turtle conservation and management. So, for example, we're looking for feedback on how should turtle habitats such as beaches and seagrass beds and reefs and mangroves be protected, and how should future turtle fishery management be conducted. Is there a need for new laws? And we've got a whole suite of laws that are used in other parts of the Caribbean, which we get feedback on. And really, I'd say this is really where the magic happens. Peter mentioned I spent about 5 years in the Turks and Caicos Islands, talking about turtles, going into the Caribbean territory, and me being of British descent. There was a lot of skepticism about my role. At the same time, the British government had taken over the Turks and Caicos Islands due to a corruption issue. So, there were all these rumors flying about, like, who is this guy? Is he really here to kind of do a turtle project? A lot of people thought I was a British spy, which I thought was really flattering. But I think what this method actually did, it kind of helped to get trust with a group of fishers that have historically been marginalized from debates like this. They've never really been part of the discussions regarding designation of marine parks or designation of management of resources that they rely on. So doing something like this was actually quite revolutionary for a lot of the people that we worked with. And not only that, it does get people from perceived opposite camps working together. So, for example, in the British Virgin Islands recently, we had people that initially wanted the turtle completely banned and thought, the act of turtle fishing was something, medieval. Actually, on a table with turtle fishers, having met each other, having seen each other's values and relationships with turtles in these films, they were actually coming together to create solutions. And this is what the community voice method is about. It's very solutions focused. It's about getting people together to provide recommendations or to support recommendations. And in Montserrat and the British Virgin Islands and Anguilla, this is what we are doing and will be doing, using the CVM to kind of gather community input, combining it with the science to provide solutions for their turtle and shark populations. And what are we doing next? So a lot of our work has kind of regarding the community voice method in the Caribbean has focused on species and habitats, but this piece of work that we've got with the RSPB and the Turks and Caicos National Trust is an evolution for the method, because it's looking at how to manage the Caribbean's largest uninhabited wilderness, and this is East Caicos, which you can kind of see on the map in the Turks and Caicos Islands. It's a stunning island. Lots of plant life that only grow on the island. Some of the best kept corals, stands of corals in the region. And unfortunately, it's had over the years a lot of developmental threats. So from the ideas of having a link road that would connect all these isolated islands to cruise ship marinas that would totally destroy the beauty and biodiversity values of the island. And we think there is another way that that the management and the future use of this island can be done. And this is what this whole project's about. So our involvement in this project is kind of got two aspects. So we've got a turtle monitoring aspect, where we're monitoring turtle nests, turtle nesting beaches and habitats across East Caicos, and we're using an early career scientist from the Turks and Caicos to do that work. Her name's Ocean White, and we're getting some really interesting information that will support this management plan. And at the same time, we're using community voice methods to understand people's links to this place, to understand their heritage links, to understand how they use the waters and lands around it, to understand how important it is for their culture, and to see how they think East Caicos could be used in the future. And the gentleman on the right is a fisherman called Dave Clare, that Peter and I have had the pleasure of meeting. He's one of the Turks and Caicos Islands' foremost turtle fishermen, and we've had a really interesting journey with him, from him being very skeptical about our project to actually getting on board, being an advocate for it, and seeing the value of conservation. And we did actually have an initiative where tourists that would go to high-end resorts in the Turks and Caicos would jump on his boat. Him, along with his cousin Gilbert Jennings, would then go out to these seagrass beds in East Caicos and catch and tag turtles. And while it's an amazing experiencing, turtle conservation and turtle monitoring in action, a lot of these guests, a lot of them that came from Manhattan in New York, their highlight was spending time with these salt of the earth fishermen, understanding their stories and their histories and what they want. So this is something that we could reignite these types of income generating activities through the East Caicos project. But as we're starting to take on these projects, as the methods that we're using across the Caribbean get traction, there is more need for this work. So we do need more support. We've got an active fundraising team that are looking to source funds to support our portfolio of work. But yeah, we certainly need support. And also, in the last couple of years, the environmental community has had a wake-up call. It's no longer tenable for scientists from countries like the UK and the West to just parachute into places like the Caribbean territories. We're fully aware of that. This is why we're using the community voice method to try and really incorporate island values and views into kind of conservation plans. But another thing that we're looking to do is to try and see if we can build capacity in these islands which we work in. And in front of you is a woman called Vita Wade. She's from Montserrat, an incredible woman. She's been running an organization called Fish and Fins and Aqua Montserrat in that island, which is all about trying to expose young Montserratian youth and children to the water, get them swimming in these areas and getting them over their understandable fears of the water, such as sharks, such as having nothing to hold on, but also quite profoundly the trauma of slavery of these people and the Middle Passages also having a relationship, also kind of influencing how they see the sea. She's actually now doing a master's at the University of Exeter, a Darwin Fellow, which a fellowship which we've helped facilitate, and fingers crossed in a year's time she will be a fully qualified MSc in ecology. So there's potential for her to be one of our anchors, a key anchor in the Caribbean territories, and drive our work forward and have it kind of locally grounded. So we're coming to the end of the presentation, and this is always, I think, a really important thing. You're probably wondering, okay, this is great. What can I do? What can I do to support? So there's many things you can do. You can join the Marine Conservation Society and support our work across the UCOT and the UK, and that's at mcsuk.org. You can also donate to our UCOT work as well. We've got an election probably in about 18 months' time, and with the climate crisis so real and ramping up, it's really important that we vote in a government that takes climate change seriously. And something that Recora will know all too well is reducing, reusing and recycling your plastics and your waste. And also there's a turtle-friendly video which people can see and how they can be more turtle-friendly while on holiday. That's on YouTube. It's called Turtles in Trouble, so I recommend watching that as well. Okay. So yeah, thank you very much. That's the end of the presentation from us. I'll stop sharing my screen, and if there's any questions, we'd be happy to take them.
Thank you, Amdeep. Thank you, Peter, for that. Yes, like Amdeep said, if there's any questions, please put them in the chat. And Peter has put forward the film as well that we tried to show, and also any other notes and things that come up in this following the presentation. I'll send out a recording of this, and anything we talk about with links and things, I'll make sure I include them in that. Just something from me, Andy. You said at the end there about how that lady, once she could complete the masters, and hopefully she would be an anchor in that area for you. Is that sort of like the not necessarily the end goal of your projects, but is that kind of how you ultimately want it to be done, or is that the best approach for these sort of marine conservation activities to really have anchors from local people who understand the local cultures to really be the voice there in these areas?
Yeah, we definitely think so. I think we've seen across the Caribbean territories, there are these people that are really looking to get involved in conserving their own natural resources, but they just got, barriers to overcome. And Montserrat, for example, is recovering from a catastrophic volcano from the mid-90s. Vita Wade, who's doing a master's, she was a climate refugee, so she was part of that population that was displaced, spent time in the UK. And because of that experience, Montserrat is on the Overseas Development Aid list. So, there are a lot of barriers to, for conservationists kind of excelling. And we definitely see that as one part of a strategy going forward, trying to build capacity in these islands. So while it's great that Peter and I can come over and do the work, it's not sustainable, know. You've got to support that local capacity building and kind of hand over the power to these communities. They essentially know their waters the best, and I think they're the best stewards, really. So yeah, that's the kind of trajectory that we're looking to go on.
Yeah. Peter, you were saying about the different populations of the turtles and over time, and kind of the reasons for the populations falling away. But would that have such a drastic impact on the populations of the turtles? Are there any other, like, overfishing in certain areas, or commercial fishing, not just the cultural fishing? Or I'm just trying to think, because some of those populations were plummeting quite fast. Is that just based on the habitat degradation and climate change and things like that?
Yeah, I think there's accumulated effects. So I talked about the big problems being habitat degradation and climate change. On top of that, you will also have, for example, leatherbacks and loggerheads on the high seas will take longline fishing baits, and and that can be fatal, more so for loggerheads than leatherbacks, and that's being quantified in recent years, and that is a big problem. You also get bycatch in nets where fishermen are trying to catch fish and a turtle gets entangled and drowned. That is also considered quite a big problem. So yeah, there are sort of accumulated effects with those species that we saw, the green turtles. The dip in green turtles in Costa Rica, it's difficult to say why that is. It could be what's known as a density effect, in that those populations got so high on those nesting beaches that they could have supported a peak population, and then naturally the population's declining and it might go in cycles. With hawksbills, I wouldn't say that is the case, just because the numbers are so low. So there's something happening to hawksbills that we're not quite sure of. And when we were in the Virgin Islands last month, one of the key sort of findings from the analysis of the science data was that 10 years ago, hawksbills are pretty much what you would see if you went snorkeling on the reefs. You're almost guaranteed to see a hawksbill. And the Shannon Gore, who was doing the tagging, she would be catching 10 hawksbills compared to one green in one session. Now you don't see hawksbills. They're just not there for some reason, and we're not quite sure why that is, although the hurricanes that hit in 2017 did have a massive impact on the inshore ecology. And fishermen were telling us that the sponges that the hawksbills specialize on, that they eat, were dislodged by the hurricane and were rolling around on the shore. So obviously the reef was scoured of sponges for a while, and maybe those inshore waters, it's just taking a long time for those sponges to grow back, and maybe in some places they're not growing back, and so those little juvenile hawksbills that were so common in inshore waters are either going somewhere else and not surviving, or going somewhere else and are unseen. So there's sort of more work to be done. But I think from the sessions that we did with the community, and when we explained what was going on with hawksbills, people generally said, okay, well, we should probably ban the fishing of hawksbills in the Virgin Islands at least until we know what's going on. Whereas the green turtles, like I say, they are abundant. You see them everywhere.
Yeah.
And so a fishery for green turtles is much more acceptable so long as it's properly managed.
Yeah. Okay, and we've had a question from JT saying, what conservation efforts are being made to regenerate the sea reed beds?
Okay, so I think probably seagrass beds. It's a good question. And in the Virgin Islands, for example, there are issues associated with tourists coming in on boats and not using moorings and actually anchoring on seabeds and creating a huge amount of damage. And that actually happens here in the UK as well, in places like Studland. So there are methods that can be deployed, something that Marine Conservation Society is doing here in the UK, actually, which is developing advanced mooring systems that allow boats to moor on sensitive seabed features without actually damaging them. Basically, buoyed anchor moorings, very simple technology, and we've been using that on seagrass beds here in the UK, and we've been doing it for about 4 years, and we're just starting to see the results of that, and it's positive. So there are things that can be done, but then I think also you need to consider actually setting up marine protected areas that protect these habitats, because you need to protect huge swathes of them to allow them to be resilient to what the impacts of climate change and how that might affect them in the future. And so that in the Turks and Caicos Islands, for example, they have one of the highest percentages of marine protected area coverage in their territory. They have a huge network of marine protected areas covering reefs and seagrass beds. And the trick now is to make sure that those marine protected areas are properly managed. Only low impact fishing is allowed in them, and that the habitats are allowed to recover.
Yeah, and it's going to add to that, Peter.
Sure.
Seagrass beds. I've been getting a lot of attention recently with the term blue carbon. Those sea habitats that kind of sequester and draw down carbon in the fight against climate change. And for islands like the Turks and Caicos and Anguilla that went through catastrophic hurricanes, this is something very close to them. So like Peter said, by protecting your seagrass beds, not only good for tourism, if people want to go and snorkel on these sites, not only good for fisheries, it's also good, really important for the global fight against climate change too.
Right. Well, thank you. Does anyone have any other questions for now? And like I said, be able to send this out, and if there's any questions following it, or if you want to find out more ways in which you can support the great work that Andy and Peter are doing, then please also get in touch with us, and we'll be able to make the connection. But I just want to say thank you again to Andy and Peter for not just the great work that you're doing, but for joining us today for World Turtle Day and speaking with us and shining a light on an issue that sometimes gets press attention, but it's more a flash in the pan. You hear about a big story once every so often, but it's the continued hard work that you guys do that's making the real difference. So thank you very much for that. And that's it. Thank you everyone for joining today, and I hope you all have a great World Turtle Day.